Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of Deadmen Tell All Tales. And this time, I got the name of my own damn show right. I said no tales last time. This is our first episode with actual full curation. And if you guys have suggestions for things you like curated, please go ahead and leave your comments below or send them to us on Facebook at deadman.com or any of the links we place below you. Deadmen Tell All Tales is a curation podcast, which means that every week, each of us is going to take turns as the curator, which is going to be assigning a topic and a piece of media that everyone is going to enjoy. That being said, our theme this week is dark children's movies. And starting this off, right before the podcast, we were talking about the Roger Rabbit controversy, and I know that some of you have not heard what this is before, and this comes with a really good story that he's attached to. Carl hasn't tested his tape yet, but I guess now he's going to find out how to. Okay, so here's the controversy. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is obviously meant for older audiences than one probably originally saw it, because everything is based off of the cartoons were older by this point. That being said, everyone knows of the infamously sexy character Jessica Rabbit that's featured in the film as a homage to Tex Avery pictures. There's a scene in the movie where they're all driving in the car, and the car hits a lamppost, and they all go spinning outside of the car and land on the floor. In the original theatrical cut of the movie, and on the very first release of the VHS tapes, it was very clear by the way that the shot was animated that Jessica Rabbit was not wearing underwear. Now, because of this, there was a huge backlash. The rest of the videotapes were pulled from shelves. The cover art was changed, and they had to re-edit, rotoscope the footage so her dress would fall in front of her, in front of her midriff of the fall, so that the controversy would be fixed. So, a ways back, maybe about like 2 years ago, I found a VHS tape at a Goodwill, sealed, containing the original cover art of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So to me, I thought for a second, there's a chance that for 50 cents, I might be actually buying the unrated copy of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And we were at Gamers Club, and Zach was with me when this happened. He can back this story up. Yep. We all decided, for the fun of it, we actually wanted to watch the movie. And we put in the VHS tape, and before we knew it, like this whole Gamers Club, usually the most separated group you could find, of all basically turned off their gaming consoles, so we're just sitting around a single TV watching like one of the greatest kids movies of all time. And then after we watched the movie, we rewound the scene, and constantly people would be walking in and out of the room as I literally sat there with like 7 or 10 other guys freeze framing the picture as she falls out of the car, trying to look up Jessica Rabbit's dress to figure out whether or not she's wearing underwear. And people were just cracking up, and then I exploded when I actually did find out that I did in fact have an original copy of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, at which point I just said, on one hand, I'd like to apologize for officially becoming the pervious man in the room right now, but I have a piece of history in this VHS player right now. So Carl, if you're ever curious if you have an original copy, now you know the shameful way to find out.
Yeah, let's see. I'm not sure.
You have the original box art cover, which is a good chance it might be the original. But you're still going to have to check the tapes, because there's been some re-releases that might still have that box art.
Yeah, I'll have to, because this is one of the original. It might not be the original, but it's definitely.
It's old. It's
old.
Like the controversy started up really quickly, so like they were pulled pretty fast. So even the fixed tapes are still pretty old.
Oh yeah.
All right, that being said, why don't we go ahead and move on? Basically how this works is for the first half of our podcast here, we're going to kind of round table around, and we're going to talk about what we brought to the table as our favorite dark children's movie. And then we'll kind of talk about some honorable mentions we might come up with, and then we'll take either we'll take a small break or go right into it. And we're going to talk about our curation assignment. I'm the curator for this week, so the topic and the episode in question are mine. And we will hopefully announce on social media who our next curator is going to be and what our next topic is going to be for next week. So, Zach, why don't you go ahead and start?
I'm Zach Hudson, and I have chosen Watership Down as my movie. Watership Down, if you have not heard of it, is a movie about rabbits.
Aww.
Yes, that's what many people think. What many people thought when bringing it home for their kids. It's not a movie for kids. Very violent.
Lots of rabbit death.
It's not a movie for kids.
Quite dark. But it's a fantastic movie, too. And yeah, it follows a group of rabbits on their way to find a new home.
Mm-hmm.
And they come across several terrifying dangers, and oh boy, I don't know where to start.
It's a lot of it's a beautiful artistic piece that just happens to use rabbits, but it is, in actuality, it is a very dark, demented, and bloody film.
Yes. There's rabbits fighting with blood, everything. Oh boy.
Judy, why don't you go ahead and go next?
Okay. Well, I'm Judy. Hi. The movie that I'm bringing to the table, so to speak, is Hunchback of Notre Dame. I was more of a sheltered child when I was little, so I didn't see things like Watership Down, and I actually still haven't seen Watership Down, so I feel like after hearing about how horrifying it is, I should probably go and look it up.
Oh, good old jolly fun.
Right? It'll be great. But so the movie I'm bringing to the table is Hunchback of Notre Dame, and, you know, I remember being a child and watching it, and it was a great, fun movie. It didn't have any darkness in it at all. And here I was a year or two ago, and it's been probably at least 5, 6, probably maybe even closer to 10 years since I've watched it. And as, at a more adult age, you see all of the different dark topics that are brought up in there, such as, you have, Frodo and Esmeralda, and how he, feels he's sinning because he likes her and wants to do dirty things to her, apparently. And then you have the awesome song in there, Hellfire, which in itself is dark, but a very beautiful song. I think you mentioned that it was on one of your guys' recent episodes.
Yeah, the Bon Voyage podcast, which there'll also be a link to below, is a Disney-based podcast me and my roommate Travis do. To date, our most successful episode is on Disney villain songs, because of course, when you think of the Disney Corporation, you think of songs about, having to choosing to, burn a woman in the fires of hell because you cannot keep up with your sexual desires.
Right.
The wonderful world of Disney.
And then there's not just that in the movie. There's also Quasimodo and him being, a deformed human being, and the hatred that is shown towards him. And, as a child, I'm like, oh, yeah, he, has deformities, and I didn't think much of it. But then when watching it at an older age, it was almost terrifying how mean everybody was to Quasimodo. So I don't know, I just the last time that I watched that movie, I found it to be extremely dark, and I was watching it and it was horrifying, honestly.
I mean, it's not even just Frollo himself, it's just the way that the whole film carries itself with just more weight than a lot of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else got any Hunchback thoughts?
Just that one scene where he grabs Frollo grabs Esmeralda and smells her hair that.
Oh my gosh, the hair
Yes.
scene.
Yes.
Oh gee, there are very few scenes in Disney movies that comparable to that. The one that gets me actually is Aladdin is probably one of my favorite Disney films. It's close to my favorite. I go back and forth a lot, but the more you think through that film, the darker and darker it gets. Where you imagine if Jasmine's required to be married by her next birthday, then chances are she's probably either 17 or 20. Just based, comparable to their customs. But Jafar, if you think about it, is probably closer to 40, 45. And there's a really quick line that a lot of people forget immediately after the Sultan goes, "You will wed Jafar," and she's like, "What?" And then she's trying to find her words, and Jafar instantly grabs her hand, looks directly into her eyes and says, "Speechless, I see. A wonderful trait to have in a wife." And I'm like, ooh.
Oh my goodness. Oh wow.
Or like watching the scenes of her later in like the, you know, in like the red slave outfit with the crown and all that, like just a little bit different watching that as an adult. But I think what makes Hunchback work, though, is that it does balance a lot of its darkness as well. Like, a lot of its darkness feels earned in that film. Yeah. Especially with Frollo, because Frollo is, like, he can be that dark, but he is still tragic in a Disney kind of way. Like, he's not maniacal. He's just really disturbed.
Right.
You know, it goes on that principle that, like, the best villains in the world never think they're villains kind of concept.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's even at the beginning of the film when Quasimodo is a child and it's Frollo going after the gypsies.
They start the movie with him trying to drown a baby.
Right. And then there was the whole thing with the priest and how he's, you know, that whole scene in the beginning where they're at the church and Frollo had just killed the mom and they're at the church, and watching that as like a child, you know, it was just kind of cool looking and everything. But then watching that as an adult, the deepness of the music that goes with that scene kind of really hits you, and you're sad because you realize, you know, Quasimodo just lost his mom. And
yeah, it's a really interesting moment when you finally discover that the Hunchback of Notre Dame theme is actually Hellfire. It's a redesign of Hellfire. It's put with completely different instruments in a different context, and all of a sudden you're like, oh boy, like I love it when people can musically do that properly in film. Any closing thoughts before we move on to our next person?
That opening's just like the best opening I've.
And let's not forget either that Quasi doesn't get the girl. That was actually one of the other big surprising things in that movie. Yeah. He doesn't get a girl until the crappy sequel.
We do not discuss crappy sequels.
I'm not against Disney sequels in general, but like, I mean, the villain from Hunchback 2 is like one of the worst fops that Disney ever made.
It's right up there with Mulan 2, in my opinion.
Mulan, I've seen Mulan 2. You don't want to see Mulan 2.
It's
I feel like the only
Netflix.
Disney sequel with any sort of relevance is Pocahontas 2, because it's actually like, it's still covering the same history, you know, and it's still stuff that happened, you know.
Well, actually, the best one for me is King of Thieves. Prince of Thieves. Prince of Thieves is fantastic.
Oh yeah,
because that one actually not only does it move the story forward, but like it actually like develops the characters a lot. Like you go all the way through Aladdin never thinking about the fact that his father might be alive, and then all of a sudden you discover he's like one of the greatest outlaws of all time. I mean,
not to mention continues drawing from like the 1001 Nights tales, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The original Aladdin.
I almost wish they would have done a spin-off show of like Iago and Aladdin's dad on their grand adventures out in the deserts and whatnot.
They did have an Aladdin like show, like
they did.
90s, like
it's one of those in-betweener shows that like you don't ask about the continuity, then we don't kind of shows.
Yeah, it was. I mean, like it went nowhere. I remember it was just like there, more or less. So.
There's a lot of those. Most of them are, you know, they're all right.
There's even a crossover with like the Hercules show.
Yeah, because Jafar dies eventually, and he goes to the underworld, and so Jafar's soul and Hades try to get Aladdin and Hercules into a gladiator match.
And then you have where they start getting confusing, like in the prequel sequel. Lion King 1.5.
Oh, jeez. The
side sequel or whatever, side quel.
We'll cover Disney continuity another time. That is literally a whole podcast into of itself.
I was going to say the most successful, I think arguably the most successful direct to VHS movie that Disney ever came out with or was going to come out with was Toy Story 2. Toy Story 2 was originally going to be a direct to tape, direct to VHS, and they actually said, wait a minute, this is actually a good movie, we should release this.
Yep. Same thing happened with my pick, but we'll get around to that. Why don't we go have you go next?
All right. I think for me, the one that is almost my first cinematic experience as a child, besides accidentally seeing Watership Down at the age of 3 or 4, which is it's crazy how much of that I can still remember, having seen it 24 years ago now. But the one that really sticks out to me, and I think a lot of people would agree, is Jurassic Park. I saw Jurassic Park as a child.
Which, to be fair, that was PG in theaters.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of people forget that they actually, it was one of the few movies, because sure, I mean, they didn't have the PG-13 rating back then, but even then it was very rare for a film to be forced to bump up to a PG-13 rating upon re-release. But that film was actually dark enough they had to put it back through the MPAA and have them re-rate the film.
It was like the reason they had to create the PG-13 rating almost.
Actually, okay, I'm a big movie nut, so don't blame me for knowing this. Actually, the 2 movies that were to blame for it, this is really weird, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Gremlins.
Okay.
Those are the 2 films that made it happen.
So it's
Gremlins.
essentially Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg is to blame for PG-13, essentially.
Yeah, I mean Jurassic Park's also a Spielberg, so yeah.
Yeah, see,
Spielberg.
exactly. Spielberg is both the bane and the boon of my childhood.
I think a lot of people fit in that same boat.
Yeah. Which it's sad to say nowadays, kids growing up in this generation look at Spielberg in a different way, I think now. Not looking back at, not to say his classic movies aren't good, but they don't get the experience of seeing it in the theater when it comes out. And
Right. But I think as like time goes on and like media gets more absorbed, I think it's only a matter of time until we get more. I think that like re-release theaters are going to become a big thing.
Well,
Like as direct movie tickets start going down and like all these we're going to have theaters start opening up soon and people aren't going to know what to do with them. I think it's going to be private people are going to start buying theaters in order to do more like UCIA style, film night kind of movie watchings.
Oh yeah,
I think that's going to be a big thing to pick up soon.
And it's as it should. I saw an image recently of kids watching Jurassic Park for the first time, and you can just see that visceral reaction that they have, and they just like they're clutching their toys to them, and they're like freaked out. And I remember feeling that, and it's amazing to think that some puppets and some very primitive CGI technology can make something that still has such an impact.
Well, the main thing was the fact that Spielberg was smart enough to know that what you could do with the synergy of the two. Like, he's very smart in knowing, like, if you go all CGI, it's going to look like crap. If you go all real, it's still going to look like crap because you cannot you could not make a wide shot, of those dinosaurs in practical effects. Like, it would, even today, it would be almost literally impossible with real effects to make anything near what Jurassic Park could do. Only recently could we get anything that could, like, the people at Disney, their Dream Team people, come up with anything that looks like the film version of the Velociraptor walking, let alone peering and sprinting and hiding, and, it physically could not happen, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he was smart enough to know that it was the mixture of the two that makes things look good, or the way that he was smart enough to do little things that people wouldn't normally notice. For instance, how many of you guys remember how scary it was the first scene when the T-Rex this is before you saw the whole T-Rex, but he's looking at the car before you see the T-Rex for the first time, and when they shine the light on the car, the pupil dilates on the giant T-Rex eye. It shouldn't be something that's scary, but it is somehow.
Also, I love the fact that when the T-Rex was crushing the car, the glass was not supposed to break.
Yes. The scene when they're on top of the overturned the Jeep before it overturns, and the pane glass when the kids are pushing it back. The T-Rex puppet was just supposed to bump it, and it came loose, and the kids freaked out.
In other words, those were their actual reactions.
Oh yeah.
Right.
They decided to just keep rolling.
Pretty much.
The greatest reactions in cinematic history were completely off the cuff.
Oh yeah.
I know.
Let's not forget the infamous alien pop-up.
Yeah, the alien. Well, to be fair, To be fair, Ridley wanted to screw with people. That wasn't an accident. That was just really mean.
Oh yeah, that was not on purpose, but yeah, it was still a live reaction we were seeing.
Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained was another good one, where he breaks the glass in his hand after he gets like all angry and upset, and he wasn't supposed to break the glass, but it actually like shattered in his hand, and he just kept rolling with it. And you see him, he's just picking the glass out of his hand, nonchalantly going along with it. His hand's bleeding, but he just kept rolling with it.
It's kind of the same thing with Apocalypse Now. Like when you like. Hearts of Darkness is the better movie. Like, Hearts of Darkness is the documentary about what went into that. And when you realize, like, how many people were on what or doing what during, like, the whole time they were out in the jungle, like, it was literally, like, an entire crew getting cabin fever at the same time. Like, jungle fever at the same time. The fact that they came home with a film at all is, like, one of the greatest cinematic miracles of all time. The fact that the movie was actually good is, like, something on the bridge of impossible. That's actually a pretty good one. Jurassic Park. What are you guys' favorite Jurassic Park scenes? Like your favorite scares?
I definitely like. I remember very vividly and this might not even be the first one because I watched the second one so much too. Not so much the third one. I think that's the example of too much CGI and plot that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But I remember the scene where the guy gets the acid sprayed in his face.
Oh my god! When Newman gets attacked by the.
And I think this is in Jurassic Park 2, but when they all get attacked by the little dinosaurs, like the little Velociraptor babies.
The really tiny ones, yeah. The girl from the very beginning of the first one.
They weren't little raptors; they were Compsognathans. They don't grow bigger than that. So
you might want to push your hipster glasses up there a little bit. They're starting to fall off. I'm just kidding. I am not one to talk.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. The whole like getting the acid spit in his face, and apparently like in the book, you know, like it doesn't explain it too well in the movie, but like it actually eats through his chest and that makes him physically blind. You know, it's like so when he's getting in the car, you know, he no longer cares about shit. He's just begging for those extra few minutes of life right before he gets eaten alive. You know, he's just time now.
I think the one for me is probably it's still the one that still gets me is the guy that gets killed in the porta potty. Like it's funny, but it's also horrifying.
It's too funny to really get scared at that though. It's like, I mean, I remember being scared at that scene as a kid, but now it's like I'm just too busy laughing. It's like, wow.
Well, the scene that probably holds up best though is probably the scene with the kids in the kitchen with the raptors. Like, that's actually something I found really interesting that Spielberg discovered about that movie is that the raptors were going to be scarier than the T-Rex because the T-Rex is big, but the T-Rex can't hide. Although, I have to admit, the scene with the Humvee and the T-Rex, holy crap.
I just love the fact that in the kitchen scene, the raptors, like, chasing down the reflection at one point of one of the kids.
Right. There's... I think for me it was the scene when the girl couldn't get the cabinet closed and the raptors chasing after her and the cabinet gets stuck.
Yeah.
Like there really is just so much to that movie, and I think that I actually am excited for Jurassic World because like we've already had our somewhat serious take on Jurassic Park. I'm one of those people that actually does feel like, you know what? We've had 3 of these so far. I think we've earned the right to have a little fun. Like, if that makes any sense. Like, it's time. It is time to embrace how ridiculous... Like, great movie, but it is time to embrace how silly this franchise is.
I was also going to say, it's like you can tell he's just taking advantage of a lot of technologies that just weren't available.
Absolutely. Like, I actually really like the idea of them trying to, like, because obviously the whole Jurassic Park thing, they're being, even with the trailers, they're very obvious about the fact that it's a SeaWorld metaphor. And when you think of it from that perspective, the whole, like, Pratt with the Velociraptors thing makes a little bit more sense. Because because to be honest, they are actually trying to train these animals for this, you know, for the thing, but, like, they are still going into a lot more of the, you know, playing God kind of thing and all that, so...
It's definitely the first trailer was a little bit too serious, followed immediately by the silly with him riding the motorcycle through
Yep.
the Velociraptors. Like, it was so... They had the slow piano music going, and it was all somber, and he had all these beautiful shots, and then Chris Pratt riding a motorcycle through a herd of Velociraptors. Like, okay, none of this makes any sense anymore. So thankfully, they addressed some of that with the new trailer, so I'm back on board.
Right.
One thing is, like, one kind of, like, blatantly obvious, like, implication that pretty much sets the premise of the film. It's like, before you see, the Velociraptors are like, the most scary ones because they're smart. Then you have the T-Rex, which is, the big scary bad guy. And then, 3 kind of gets like tucked under the radar, but, they have the Spinosaurus, which is like even more dangerous, yada yada. And then, here we see, the Velociraptors being well trained and loyal. And then there's something out there that's like, some sort of genetic hybrid that's 1,000 times worse. It's like, holy crap, what are we going to see, And, they do a good job, like, not showing it, Or it's like only show...
I was going to say, the new trailer...
Yeah, it's like a giant T-Rex with arms now or something like that.
Well, it's basically, it looks like they took the first 3 movies and kind of literally just hybrided the movies together, because you've got the intellect of the Velociraptor, you've got the pterodactyls from 3, which is about the only thing that I remember from that movie now. The fact that they can communicate with each other, they touched out a little bit on 3 as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got kind of like a fusion of everything, so it's like the super villain, basically.
Right. I mean, I actually do like 3 in its own way, because like 3 has some of the best, like, overlooked cheesy action movie lines that, like, no one ever quotes. Like, there's this really good line in 3 I absolutely love when they find their way into, like, the decrepit factory that, like, lab was left behind. And it's, like, it's Alan from the first film and, like, one of the new characters, and they're talking to each other, and the other guy says, hey, is this where you guys made dinosaurs? And the camera zooms in on him, and he just, with no sense of irony in his face, is like, no. This is where we played God. And I'm like, it's so cheesy, but I love it.
Honestly, the scene I remember the most is the part where, like, the guy's trying to get something out of the vending machine. Other guy comes in, just kicks the glass in, and it's like, fuck you. And then he tries to do it, and then just epic fails, like,
right.
Oh, come on.
All right, Albert, why don't you go ahead and go next?
Actually, right before, I kind of wondered, were they, like, playing a joke on, like, that accidental scare they made in the first movie with the glass breaking?
I don't think they would. It'd be pretty obscure because that's not even in technically the first film. You'd have to know the behind the scenes story in order to get that reference.
It's like a super inside joke to, like, those that get it. It's like
possibly.
Kind of like wondering if it's,
you never know. I mean, a lot of times these stories don't come out unless you listen to, like, audio commentaries and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Anyways, my movie. I decided to go with Casper. It's like,
okay.
It's like, at first glance, it's a very, just cheesy, feel-good, funny film. And then it's like you kind of, like, peek into the really deep and very twisted implications. It's like, first of all, you find out that Casper's been haunting the house for, like, nearly 100 years now, kind of based on, the visible age of, like, the newspaper print and all that, and how old the house is. And, the fact that it's already, gone through generations of owners because it belonged to, Kerrigan's dad. And it's like, okay, so this go... And then, you also see, like, other things that kind of hint at, how long he's been there. But, we get it now, Casper's really old. Okay, and then, what else? Yeah, the fact that every ghost that appears is, like, they just, like, imply that they die some sort of horrible death, like... Steve Harvey falls into, like, an open pit quarry and presumably falls to his death, because he comes back as a ghost later. Kerrigan falls down, like, a really huge cliff and comes back, and it's like... Yeah, and then, there's other things, too, such as, the Lazarus machine, the idea of crossing over. And, yeah, it's like, they touch on the topic in a really lighthearted way, but you kind of realize it's like, wow. The implications are pretty twisted, It's like some of these people die, like, horrible, painful deaths, and there's not even any trauma, They're just, I wouldn't say at peace ghosts. They're just ghosts, like, just getting on with it,
Right. It's been a while since I've seen that movie.
It has. It's been a while since I've seen it too. The one scene that I can remember mostly is, and I hope I'm remembering it right, but didn't like the girl's dad go through the machine or something and he becomes the ghost temporarily?
No, he gets while they're waiting to get the machine ready, the other three like comic relief ghosts, they're all partying with him and they get him drunk. And then he accidentally falls down an elevator shaft. And so now Casper has to sacrifice his chance at life again in order to bring your dad back.
That's what it was. And it you know, he doesn't seem that worried that like he's a ghost or anything, but if I remember right, the girl is actually like really sad because it's like her dad just died.
Well, yeah, and she's more sad than anything now that Casper has to sacrifice his chance at life in order to, because he only can do it once.
Right.
So
there's like this really huge just internal conflict, like, you know, but with Kat, you know, and then, you know, Casper just comes right up, you know, without even like making a deal about it, and just comes up right up, casually says, "Come on, your dad needs this more than I do." It's like
it's just such a pure heart. He doesn't even take a moment to think about it. It's just, and there's even the scene in it when they actually talk about how Casper died. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people forget that one. I mean, he basically was like died of pneumonia out in the cold. Yeah, and just fell asleep and never woke up.
Like, just keep in mind, you know, it's like I kind of explained earlier, you know, they don't say exactly when he died, but it's like presumably like sometime in like right around like, you know, the turn of the century, 1900s, you know, modern medicine was still, you know, not quite, you know, near its glory days.
Right.
You know, so it's like even a common cold could kill you. So.
I mean, even can tell sort of by the way that the old-fashioned way that his mother's ghost dresses. Mm-hmm. Like if you relate that anywhere near to where he was. Of course, it only could be so old because her husband is still alive. No, never mind. That's a different character I'm thinking of. Never mind. I'm getting backwards.
Yeah, Amelia, she's like, she dies like pretty much only a few years before the film starts. So it's like she's very recently dead. So.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know, now that you mention Casper, it's funny because I'm remembering my brother used to watch the Casper the Friendly Ghost like film shorts. So they were like little episodes, and I'm remembering some of these, you know, they're like cartoon ones, and I remember one of them being where Casper meets like a little dog and he like, becomes friends with it, and then the dog like dies and he gets all sad and he's crying, and then the dog becomes a ghost, so he becomes all happy again.
Right.
And now that I think about it, right? Now that I think about it, it was really, really sad.
It's kind of like
It's from the beginning of that episode, like a bunch of other ghosts are going, "Hey Casper, come on, let's go and boo people," and you know.
That's what, yes. Oh my gosh.
Casper didn't want to go and boo people.
Boo people, yes.
Like the one that gets me is that like if you're talking about the ending ghost thing. I talk about frequently in a lot of stuff that I work on. There's two animators probably that are like more influential to me than anybody else. That's Bruce Timm and Tex Avery. Tex Avery was the original creator of most of the Looney Tunes, and was always like he was like the biggest like he was like the leader of like the anti-Disney aesthetic. Like he was the one that like originally went out there and said, you know, if Disney's going to be big and heartfelt and warm, then we're going to be cold and loud and crass and all that. And he created his own version of Little Red Riding Hood called Red Hot Riding Hood, where he does the entire thing as like a 1920s gangster flick, essentially. Where like Red Riding Hood is basically like the call girl at the like she's the dancer at the nightclub. And like the wolf is like pining over her. And like, but a lot of people forget about it, that the reason they did that is because the absolute original Grimm's Tale Red Riding Hood was actually a story about like sexual predators. So they were actually trying to reach something similar to that story. And then what's really weird is the ending where he finally, after all these shenanigans, says, you know, I'm all done with dames. I'm done forever. And then she comes back out on stage and he starts doing the thing. He's like, nope, I'm not doing it again. And he takes two pistols out of his hands and shoots himself in the head. And then as he's floating away to heaven, his ghost then sees the girl and then comes back down and starts hooting and hollering or whatever. And that's how the cartoon ends. I'm like, and don't get me wrong, it's one of my favorite cartoon shorts of all time, but it's a morbid son of a gun.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like that was the one where like he follows her home, but then it's like an old lady.
Yeah, it's the grandmother, who's then charging after him.
He's like, no.
It's a really good cartoon. If you get a chance to watch it, I think you can find copies some places called Red Hot Riding Hood by Tex Avery.
And I remember seeing one where it was, I think it was Daffy Duck telling a story of, and the story ends with him shooting himself in the head too. Like he's, our main character reaches the end of his rope and he draws out a pistol and shoots himself. I remember that pretty vividly.
There's a lot of those.
That's pretty twisted, even when it's just, blows his bill backwards. It's pretty twisted to think about it. And
absolutely.
Early Tex Avery shorts, like especially in the pre-Looney Tunes days, were just overall just very morbid, twisted.
I hear you. All right. I'm gonna go and do mine. Mine, I went back and forth on a couple different projects I was gonna pick. If it wasn't for the fact that we're doing a Batman animated curation, I was gonna pick Mask of the Phantasm. But
that too. But I'm like, we're already doing Batman today.
Yeah, and trust me, I'm all set on my Batmans. Like, I got Batman animated on vinyl. I got Tim Burton's 1989 Batman on vinyl.
Gosh.
And just yesterday, Batman 1966 on vinyl.
Oh my god.
Still trying to track down a couple other ones, but anyways.
Now that I think about it, since Tim Burton directed those first two films, I wonder if Johnny Depp is not sneaking around in like somewhere, some sort of uncredited role that we just never noticed.
Well, that was really, really early in his career when they chose him for Batman. And if it gives you an idea of like how weird of a decision that was, up until that point, Tim Burton had only directed 2 feature-length films, Beetlejuice and Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Love Beetlejuice.
Yeah, so this is before his big partnership with Johnny Depp and putting him in everything.
Well, directly after that, he went back to work for Disney again. That was the main thing that got him like really on the map. Because that's what he did before this, is he was like an animation assistant at Disney, worked on things here or there, and then they let him do Frankenweenie and what was the other one? Vincent. That was the other short he did, which is really good if you haven't seen it.
That is a really good short.
But my choice actually is like, if you look at like different auteurs of the era, if there's one guy that basically defined the idea of dark kids movies, it was Don Bluth. And of all of Don Bluth's movies, the one that always sticks out to me is what a lot of people assume to be his last truly amazing film, which was All Dogs Go to Heaven 1.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Which, I mean, where do you even start with that one? I actually heard interviews of like, because not many people knew this, even before the movie, like Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise were like best friends for years on end. And they interesting story about this movie before I get into the premise. They originally, you didn't have to do in-studio recordings with like everyone there, but they wanted to because they knew these guys had chemistry. And so they do that scene at the end of the movie when Itchy's finally got to let Charlie go because he doesn't want to go. He literally can't afford to be on his schemes anymore. And apparently they were both just bawling in the studio when they made that scene. Or at least I know for sure DeLuise was. But like, from what both of them were in the same room at the interview talking about this. And like, they basically said that like, yeah, they insisted on having us both come in. You could hear a pin drop in that room. It was so tense. But on top of that, like, Bert actually like learned to sing for that part. And like, it is just a really dark movie. When you take away the dogs from it, it's a really morbid movie. Oh, like, yeah, you don't technically see the car hit, but you see the body hit the water. Like, you literally see him come back to life step by step as he gasps for air. Mm-hmm. You have and you have the little girl who's essentially been, like, dragged in, he's basically in slave trade at that point from the people manipulating her for the races,
Well, look at the way they've got her dressed in that movie. They've got her dressed up like the equivalent of a Lady of the Night. I've actually just saw this movie not too long ago, and it's got all kinds of drug references and like smoking and drinking and gambling and
yeah. I mean, they got Charlie wasted before they put him on the ramp.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about
really
that.
Did. And they got torture. The guy gets dunked into a tank full of piranhas at one point. And,
Yep.
Like all kinds of stuff.
There was the hell sequence though. Yeah, that's
Yeah, that was.
It's gorgeous, absolutely.
It's a gorgeous scene, but keep your kids away. My goodness.
It's a brief throwback to from a scene like that really sticks with me now from my childhood is the nightmare scene from A Brave Little Toaster.
Yeah, with the fireman clown and.
Oh my goodness.
Oh no.
Well, and looking back at it now, it's like it was terrifying. But then looking back at it now, it's so creative because all the stuff that he's afraid of is stuff that would be completely horrible for toasters.
Right.
Forks and water and.
Like, does everyone remember the scene when the when the guy at the chop shop takes the heart out of the the radio transmitter?
Oh yeah.
And
oh
just
my gosh.
pulls the thing from the corpse and snips the wires and ugh, that
So
movie.
horrific looking.
I was saying the only nightmare scene I remember was when he was like, struggling not to fall in the bathtub, but his plug was plugged into like the bathtub wall, and he was like, no, don't.
I mean, it's just like that whole movie is like just imagine Toy Story, but like 5 times darker.
Yeah,
And
pretty much.
And then the whole worthless song too. Phenomenal piece.
That's a John Lasseter film, isn't it? Didn't he have something to do with it?
I would imagine he did. I mean, hell, even the sequels of that were like dark and actually had quite a bit of heart to them. I mean, like, you shouldn't be able to get invested in the outcome of The Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars, but you'd be surprised.
Oh gosh, I haven't seen those movies, any of those, in forever.
Right, that's the third one. Like, the second one, him and the girl get married. And the third one, they have a kid. And the baby gets trapped. Okay, this is going to sound really stupid. The baby gets trapped in a bubble. The bubble flies into space and lands on Mars. And they have to build they have to MacGyver a spaceship in order to.
Which is made out of like a laundry basket and a fan.
And they power it with popcorn.
This is
And
a
they power
total
it with
90s
popcorn.
concept. This has to be a 90s.
We're out of popcorn. We can't get back to Earth.
Oh no. How are we going to find popcorn on Mars?
I'm just kind of suddenly remembering, like, what I personally think is probably the most ridiculous part of the film now is, like, when the guy's, like, at home walking around thinking what he's going to do about, his missing items, the TV comes on and tries to, like, convince him to go to the dump by, like,
Come on down to Big Eddie's Traffic Emporium. We've got all the appliances, Rock Mountain prices.
I thought it was
crazy.
Earnings Disposal followed by...
They change it. He changes his name every single time they turn the TV back on.
Well, and it's crazy how much, how the parallels really, when you think about it, between that movie and Toy Story are. Like,
And they are both Disney pictures.
and it's very, very similar. Like, these inanimate objects lose their owner and have to go back to them, and the owner's also looking for them at the same time.
And there's something interesting about
The
Disney
aging
making a
of the
movie
owner
about
over the
nostalgic
course of the,
attention.
films.
Yeah, going back to college, which is a big part of 2 and 3, Toy Story-wise, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Which actually, speaking of Toy Story, I got one more. We're going to do some kind of bit of, before we move on to our next section, we'll do a couple minutes where we're just going to kind of rapid fire some honorable mentions as we think of them. One of them I want to bring up, I don't know if a lot of people remember this. There actually is a 2D animated live action movie of Buzz Lightyear's Star Command before the television series started.
I remember that.
It was essentially like a cold pilot, but it was way darker than anything you'd see on the show. And they go through the origins of all the different characters. Essentially, they open it with, like, Buzz is on a mission on the moon. His partner dies, and he basically goes, like, completely cold and heartless and refuses to take on a partner ever again.
It was actually, like, the same opening premise as one of the James Bond movies. Like, his partner... It's like when 006 presumably dies, and then you find out he comes back and he just works for the bad guys. Like...
Right.
I think they purposely knocked it off that.
They're inspired by a lot of different things. Because the thing was too is like then they kind of introduced that like I can't remember their names for the life of me, but like two of the two humanoid characters both were like people from the academy in different ways.
I don't remember the guy's name. Boomer.
He was the janitor at the academy, but he wanted more than anything to be a space cadet, and then that's how he got to be one. And the other one was the partner that Buzz was supposed to have, but he was trying to. It's like the movie is really good at him. Like they never shy away from the fact that there seems to be a subtext that he might be shying her away because she's a girl, and on top of that, she's supposed to be a princess. But she refuses to be one. She wants to actually like help the world instead of just being a symbol. But like
earn her right to distinction rather than just be born into it.
Absolutely. But Buzz is always very quick to justify the fact that he's saying, at least to himself, that he's only doing it because he doesn't want a partner, and it has nothing to do with the fact that she's a girl. But the script is really good at emphasizing the fact that it's not like that has left his mind entirely. And then XR was the interesting one, where he was a robot built by the LGMs, because, like, maybe Buzz would agree to go with a robot partner, because it has no soul. But what happens is after XR gets blown up, this is after the LGMs are disconnected and they're not as smart, so they kind of have to hodgepodge them all together. And that's when he actually has like a personality and a soul and all that. And he just becomes hilarious. Like, there's a scene in the movie I memorized for like no reason when they're all in a meeting. It's like, basically the whole thing's a parody of the scene from Star Wars 4, from A New Hope, when they're all sitting around trying to figure out how to defeat the Death Star. Like, almost note for note, it's a parody of that scene.
Oh,
because Buzz is volunteering to be like the secret ship that's going to sweep in and do the like Luke Skywalker thing. And then XR busts into the meeting and goes, all right, I think I got this problem figured out. So this is what we're going to do. So whatever, Monday through Wednesday, Emperor Zurg has control of all of the universe. But Thursday through Saturday, it's ours. We alternate Sundays. What do you think? And then the commander's up there. He's like, sweet mother of Venus, what did you do to him? We fixed him. Yeah, we think. And it's like, it bugs me that, like, of all the weird, like, Disney, I can't believe you haven't seen whatever, like, obscure things. Like, obviously no one can see all Disney, but I swear there's so many people that haven't seen that movie. And, like, it's actually up to, like, Pixar quality, despite the fact it never made it to theaters.
Right.
Like, it's crazy good. It is, like, their true introduction of, like, Emperor Zurg is, like, a legitimate villain. And he's so good. We discover
why the little green aliens always speak in unison.
Right.
Connected by a very literal hive mind. That
yes.
Is called Unimind.
Which Emperor Zurg is going to kidnap, corrupt it, and launch it at planets so that he can literally take mind control over every being of the universe.
Yeah.
You know, for kids!
You know, I kind of wonder, is there like some sort of weird political context with these little green aliens? It's like, look at all these guys so dependent on their hive mind mentality.
So you're saying that the LGMs are some sort of a metaphor for communism?
Oh dear.
It's like communism is great when everyone is in the system and it's working, but as soon as you take the system away from them, it just all falls.
Hear that? That's the sound of us falling down the rabbit hole. And there we go. Anyone else have anything they want to rattle off as a quick honorable mention?
I don't know if this is like a kid's movie, but I saw it when I was a kid. Labyrinth.
That's a kid's movie.
Yeah, and you know, back when I was a kid, I loved the heck out of that movie, and I watched it again recently. Well, rather, my brother will watch it basically once a day for like a week.
Right.
And my brother has autism, so so he was watching it recently. He was on a streak of watching Labyrinth, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, this movie is really not even necessarily like it's dark, but it's even more so just plain bizarre.
I mean, that's what the Henson stuff was back then.
It was, yeah, but like, you know, as a child, you don't really realize it's bizarre. You're like, you know, this is funny and it's, you know, cool, and the music is awesome because, you know, David Bowie.
Yeah, and his features.
How many nowadays fangirls were like kids back then, and you know just didn't even pay mind to like his crotch bulge. They were probably disgusted by it, and now they're all like, "Oh my god, his bulge! Oh, I want to touch it."
Tight pants. Just saying. David Bowie.
There you go. You just proved my point.
Yeah, but Labyrinth has got some good stuff going for it. I didn't watch Dark Crystal as a kid. That was the only one I missed, mainly. Like, maybe I saw it and I just forgot about it. I'm not sure.
I can't say I've seen that either. Is that what was that one again?
It was also a Henson project, but it was one of the weird ones.
Isn't it like it was still
one with, like-
the puppet type of film?
Yeah, it's mostly animatronic.
Yeah.
It was all puppets, and it was like about some like, you know, it was one of those, you know, random nobody gets given a quest and becomes somebody type deal.
Okay.
No, wait, I did see it once. I was
There's a funny story
I think I was in the second grade. I was in a class slumber party. Like, it wasn't like a real one, but like, you know, like the kid, we'd all like basically get picked up at 8 to stay after school from like 2 to 8 and just like ate popcorn, watch movies or whatever. And I remember it was like the weirdest thing. Man, how should I don't know if I should tell this story. Oh, anyways, so they told us all to wear like our PJs to class to afterwards or whatever. And I don't think my parents were paying attention when I left, and my teacher, like, I think caught me because like I wasn't thinking. It was only like, you know, second grade or whatever. And I went to school just wearing like one of my dad's like big shirts I'd usually wear, but I didn't know to wear shorts underneath it.
Whoops.
This is way
So-
back, like, when you were wearing, like, the little print panties with, like...
I don't know what I was wearing. All I know is I had to climb over people a couple times, and my teacher kind of called me over, and I'm like, I didn't know. I mean, I just forgot. I just wasn't thinking that far ahead.
Great. Oh my gosh, that's great.
I literally remember more of that than I do of Dark Crystal.
One time I saw Dark Crystal was 3 years ago. I watched the first 10 minutes of it, and then next thing I knew, I woke up, and it was like the last 10 minutes of the movie. And it turned out I kind of like fell asleep on my then girlfriend's at the time lap while we were watching it together. I was like, oh, what? She was looking down, all smiling. It's like, oh, it's okay. It was cute. I'm like, I fell asleep.
I know what you mean.
It was one of those moments.
I couldn't tell you for the life of me what movie it is, but maybe you guys can help me remember what it was called. It was the scene that I remember is the kid falls into the water and he can't get out of the water, like the water's holding him in, and someone has to stick like a staff into the water to pull him out.
Ooh,
Yeah, see, I can picture the movie, but I can't think of what it's called.
Right.
And I remember it freaked me out because this kid was like drowning under the water, and I think they had like a pane of glass or whatever there to kind of keep him in.
Right.
And I don't know if it's just the same movie, but I remember there was a movie that had an Ewok in it.
I got one more I want to bring up real quick, because if I can't bring up this topic and feel good about myself if I don't bring up this movie. Neverending Story 1.
Oh, yes.
Neverending Story.
God, that's been forever since I've seen that one.
I got it on Blu-ray somewhere, but I haven't seen it in a few
I
years.
finally saw that movie, like, I think it was this year, well, sometime in 2014 anyway, and I'm just, like, too busy, like, noticing the fact that everything was, like, so obviously filmed in Germany.
Oh, it was a very German movie.
Yeah.
Like, they try
What's
to pass
that?
it off as, like, taking place in the U.S. It's like, nope, Germany.
What's
Only in Germany do bankers wear three-piece suits.
Say that again?
What's dark about that one?
Well, try rewatching a lot of it. I mean, it's like there's
Yeah.
a scene when Atreyu's horse dies.
Oh.
The whole, his whole journey is just really tragic through the whole thing, and like trying to find the parallels between him and Bastion through the whole thing, and there's a lot of subtext about the death of creativity and like how the nothing is like a representation of our own innermost fear, about the absence of strength in our like it was literally like the nothing. I think in a way the nothing's supposed to be a representation of innermost fears, but I think it's also like the absence and the death of creativity. In a way, that's sort of like it's the consumption of wasted life in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird because there's one of those creature things in each of them. But Neverending Story, by far, the first one is the best in that regard. And then by the time you get to 3, it is like one of the most horrific things you'll ever see. It's definitely something we're going to feature on Dead Men Movie Night, which we haven't gotten around to making one yet, but that's going to be one of the first films we do.
A few years ago, this is 4 years ago already, I was in Germany on a class trip. We went to Bavaria Film Studios, and I got to sit on the original Falcor prop.
Oh, jeez.
That's cool.
Nice.
I know they still have that. That's cool.
Yeah, they still have it. It's sitting as a tour item at the Bavaria Film Studios, and it is just an inanimate object, and you're like, Falcor? And I can like totally imagine, some little kid, childhood ruin moment, 5-year-old, watches the movie, then goes there with his parents, like,
what do they do to Falcor?
And then he doesn't move or anything.
Falcor!
And then as the kid moves away, and they're all dragging the kid away, and he turns back, and Falcor winks.
Yes.
Love Dragon.
Are you ready for a really obscure honorable mention? I'm
Sure.
wondering if any of you have even seen this, or if it's just something I saw a lot as a kid for no
You're
apparent
just,
reason.
a messed up child.
Okay.
Alright.
Did you ever
I
find
watched
out
a
what that
movie.
movie was at the well?
You know what? I can't. That's all I remember is the kid falls in the water and they can't. He has to get pulled out with his staff, and that just as a kid, that the thought of that just didn't bode well with me. I think it was a fantasy movie, but I couldn't tell you much beyond that. I watched a lot of strange movies as a child.
Right.
I watched, but anyway, this one is. It was called I think it was called Flight of the Navigator.
Yes, I know this one.
Yes.
And it's not dark until you really think about it, because the kid loses like 10 years of his life.
Yeah, he wakes up like 10 years later and he's still the same age, and like, his little brother's like 20, and
his dog's all trained, and he's like, "Where's my family?" Like that moment really gets me. Like watching that again, it's like, oh crap. And like you want to think of the little robot thing as kind of a friendly guy, but that's pretty twisted actually.
yeah, it's a fascinating picture.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I watched that movie a lot as a kid. I watched that. I watched The Rocketeer, which I couldn't tell you anything about it now, except for at some point, apparently oil comes on the window of an airplane. That's the only part of that movie I remember anymore.
Right.
And also the scene where they're testing the rocket and it like spins around on the rope. I think there's this. Yeah, this is. I've seen that movie so many times, but I couldn't tell you anything about it now.
Right. I think we're going to cut off this part, so we're going to take a brief intermission, and then when we come back, we are going to talk about our curation assignment of the week. Before we head out, very quickly, just do a little bit of self-promotion here. This particular episode of the Deadmen Tell All Tales podcast is brought to you by The Man Who Watched Batman Volume 1. This is a book of my recent publishing. It is a step-by-step, episode-by-episode analysis of the first season of Batman the Animated Series, featuring a quote from Nightmare World and mystery creator Dirk Manning of Image Comics, and covers the first 28 episodes of what is debatably the greatest animated show of all time. Copies will be available in comic book stores very soon, and within the next month, copies will be available for online purchase. For more information about the book, please follow us on Facebook at facebook.com, The Man Who Watched Batman, or send us an email at deadmeninc@gmail.com. So, we will be right back after a brief intermission. Welcome back to Deadmen Tell All Tales. As we mentioned right before the podcast, right before this, this particular episode is brought to you by The Man Who Watched Batman Volume 1, which, speaking of which, is actually the focus of what I've chosen for this week's curation. For this week's curation, I actually chose a episode that is actually featured in the book. It's actually the season finale of the first season, an episode, the third episode in the series, featuring the Scarecrow, called Dreams of Darkness, in which Batman opens the episode after being captured in a straitjacket in Arkham Asylum. And things kind of just go downhill from him for there. So, since I've probably done the most research on the episode in general, and since I've picked it, I'd like to go last. So otherwise, we'll kind of go around the circle with whoever would like to start and hear your guys' thoughts and ideas about interpretations or things like that, and then at the very end I'll go back and answer questions or give my thoughts and so on and so forth. So who'd like to go first? Anytime now.
Let's not all jump on this at once.
I didn't study for this.
Ken, I need to make a confession that will make you hate me, probably.
You didn't get... Well, you got brought in literally 20 minutes before we got into this, so...
Yeah, I have actually never seen an episode of Batman the Animated Series.
Okay, now I hate you.
I had seen like a couple because I have a friend who's a pretty avid fan of Batman, but it
Okay.
had been a while since he'd shown me an episode, so watching this one was kind of cool.
Like, I used to watch it back in the day, but it's so long ago, I don't even remember, like, a single episode or what.
Right.
in it, so.
If only you knew somebody who wrote a comprehensive guide guiding people to watching the show for the first time from beginning to end. If only you knew somebody who was actually that big of a Batman nerd to go through and spend 4 months doing such a thing.
Where shall we find such a person?
I wonder.
Man.
Definitely not here.
I don't think he exists. I think he's just a figment of, imagination.
Well, Judy, why don't you go ahead and have you start first, because you probably have the least ties to the show, so I'm actually curious of your thoughts.
Okay, yeah, no, that's actually a good point. I've actually never been that big of a sort of a superhero person.
Mm-hmm.
So, I get the gist of a lot of the superheroes and villains and everything like that, but I've never really, gotten too deep into the story of any of them. And so watching this episode was actually kind of interesting for me. I, had never ever thought of the fact that I really liked it when they brought up the fact that some of the citizens in Gotham may have thought him to be it's not that he had gone crazy, but he may have had been insane that whole time. And I thought that was an interesting thought, that maybe Batman's been, mentally insane for as long as he's been around. And that was a thought that never occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely thought that was interesting. Let's see. What else was there? There was one other thing that really struck me. I know I didn't know a lot of the villains relating to Batman.
Right.
Especially coming into watching this episode. So the Scarecrow I feel like I've heard of him before as a villain.
He's only been barely used in like other media, like outside of the comics.
Yeah.
Like he's a difficult one to do. Like when you get into like the different episodes they give him in this show, like you realize like how delicate of a character he is to get right. That's why a lot of people don't try.
Right. I feel like it would be interesting to see him more often because I like his idea of being a villain, that at least from what I got from this one episode that I've seen that had the Scarecrow in it, he seems to like instilling fear in others.
Mm-hmm.
And, like most villains enjoy doing that, I'm sure, but he has more of a drive than other villains would to instill fear in others.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that would be interesting to have him as a major villain in, say, a movie or something like that, as versus like the Joker.
Right.
Well, he was sort of in Batman, the first of the...
He was in Batman Begins,
Batman
but he's still more of a lackey in that
Yeah.
film.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting interpretation, I have to say. But still, like, he does feel like kind of a wasted potential when all said and done, you look at his role in the movie outside of, like, what he... Let's look at what he accomplished or, like, what he did as an own villain. He's really good, but it really sucks that he does spend the entire movie as a pawn.
Yeah.
Then, he makes that really brief cameo in, like, the second movie, like, at the beginning.
And his brief cameo in the third movie in the middle.
Death by exile.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was him.
Zach, why don't you go ahead and go next?
All right. Yeah, it was a really good episode. I like the hallucinations really stood out to me. Like He almost runs over Robin, and I I don't really know too much what to say, but it was a good episode. uh, liked like the way he started fighting through the hallucinations near the end too. That was good. Uh, I'm not too much from a Batman background myself. I actually also never really watched the animated series.
Mm-hmm.
It's on my list of things to watch now. I didn't watch a lot of cartoons back in the day. But,
Well, it's definitely something we might want to try, because like I haven't thought. I didn't mention this to you guys before. I have. We experimented with different things with the channel before, and I did like do like a Batman blog earlier today where I was going to talk about things that are going on with the book, but like at the same point, I always thought it also would be kind of a cool idea if I had like a DC club or something we did where like, maybe like every week, a couple of us get together and like all watch the same episode, kind of like how we're doing now, and talk about it. So if that's something we want to do, I can recommend some episodes you guys haven't seen yet, and we can give that a shot. So that'll be something to discuss directly after the podcast. We'll throw some ideas around.
If I can jump in after what Zach had mentioned, it reminded me of one of the big things that I thought about throughout the whole episode was that it almost seemed like an allegory to depression, in that Batman was, he was experiencing, these were hallucinations more on the side of insanity, but, there's the fact that there are a lot of people out there who suffer from severe depression to a point where they'll have nightmares or hallucinations like that. And the part where he's fighting through the hallucinations kind of reminded me of how there's people out there today who fight depression all the time, and yet they try to push through it and just get through the day. And it was actually kind of moving, I guess, to kind of see that and to make that connection. So
I was gonna say, it kind of like shows a lot of instances of him, like just stepping up and getting over, whatever like pervading fear is like getting to him in that particular hallucination, just to break through and save the day, basically. It's like,
and there are a couple of the hallucinations are very depressing, like his parents.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's okay. Now I don't want to give too much about my thoughts about this thing, like, so I'm not going to give any context to like what it means or whatever. But I will say, for you guys' reference, this is 28 episodes in, and that is actually the very first time in the entire show they have literally shown the scene of his parents with the gun all the way through. They've hinted to it all throughout the season in different episodes. But that's the only time, that is the first version they ever show of his parents with the alley, with the gun, all in one scene's context.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know that. But, so yeah, you had like the scene with his parents, and then the scene where he, hallucinates that he runs over and hits Robin. So it's like it's like his fault that his sidekick just died, and the fact that he is hallucinating that and going through that, fear, it's a very depressing thought. So I don't know, that was a connection that I kind of made in there. So
all right, Albert, why don't you go ahead and go next?
Yeah, well, as we mentioned, Batman Begins, that was like the thing that kind of like just really struck me as soon as like we reached like the plot of like the Scarecrow and stuff. I'm like, oh hey, that was like half the plot of Batman Begins too. They were being hallucinations in the water and planning to make people breathe it somehow. Yeah, that was like the thing that kind of hit me at first, and then later on the stuff we just talked about, psychosis, hallucinations, and mental illness and all that stuff, and and it shows Batman getting over some traumas that are like pretty damn hard to get over. It's like they don't seem to appreciate it enough, but they do like enough for people to really understand the implications, but they do touch on it so that those that are willing to drive into it can get it. It's like in terms of how him it's like just wrangling the snake, getting over his fear of snakes in that instance so he can shut off the pump and whatever, and him getting over his vertigo just so he can jump down and stop the Scarecrow in that instance. Yeah, and it's just like, you know, a lot of instances of that, you know, fighting against, you know, psychosis and whatnot, and, you know, getting over phobias and traumas, you know how like certain instances can just make you, you know, step up and just get through it, in like, you know, very life or death happening and whatnot, you know. But, yeah.
Carl, what are your thoughts on the episode that you've never seen before?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm going to go ahead and say pretend like I've seen the episode. So let's
Dream the darkness sucks. No.
Let's take out our flashy thingies from Men in Black and everyone forget that I haven't seen the episode. So I can. I really like the part where Batman broods and he beats up people. And the part where they show his parents die, and I like the part where he fights a crazy villain in a dark setting and uses the shadows to his advantage.
And then Doc Brown comes out with a DeLorean, and it was a crossover like you'd never seen before. Never aired on television again.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
I figured I'd throw it out there, and I've got a fairly good chance of being accurate. So
you got a couple of those checkpoints right. This episode does differ from that from a little bit. So, okay, so I'm gonna do my best. It's actually been a while since I've seen this one myself. I was going to rewatch it for the episode, but ran out of time. But a lot of like I said, by the time you get done writing a thing like this, these episodes get so ingrained in your head, you pretty much just know the whole thing by heart. A lot of the main points I'm going to go over here from stuff I touched on in the book. A lot of the main influential themes, or like the subtext of the film, is very clear. They actually start, if you remember correctly, the crashed Batmobile is one of the very first scenes you see in the movie. Between the framing of that and the showing of what they show of Arkham Asylum, it actually seems to be a reference of the 1927 film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Which is actually the film it's a German expressionist film that inspired Tim Burton's overall aesthetic. The main thing that defines that movie, and similar to this episode, which is why I think that's not a coincidence, is that the entirety of the Dr. Caligari is narrated by a crazy person. And so that's why when the film goes on, like all the walls are bent and all the spiraling staircases and everything in the entire story is warped because you know that the narrator is an escaped convict from the asylum. And Batman narrates the episode. On top of that, despite the fact that, this whole series wears this noir influences on its sleeves, but this is the very first episode and the only one I've ran into so far that is actually narrated as a noir, which is kind of fascinating. And this is the third ever appearance of Scarecrow. Now, in the past, Scarecrow has tried out different forms of his toxins, all of which have been infected in different ways. The first toxin was I think it was a green gas, if I remember correctly, which only projected illusions of people's darkest fears in front of them. In the second episode he was featured, called Fear of Victory, he was using his power to try to manipulate sports results in this giant, like, cat and mouse experiment he was working on. In which case, it was like a anthrax-like powder he infected on people that would cause people, instead of just seeing illusions, but to actually see, like, one-to-one projections on top of real-life people, which would give another level of tricking your mind, because it is taking place of things that you know are real, instead of just having random projected hallucinations. This third aspect, though, it leads further and further towards the idea that Scarecrow constantly talks about how he's continually experimenting, and this is also a toxin he created just for Batman, which is also kind of interesting. On top of that, so if he's developing this for so long, you see that this is the first toxin he's created that actually lasts long periods of time. It actually starts, once again, it's taking place of things of his physical environment and replacing them with his normal stimuli. The idea that he knows that the fact that it keeps going in and out pushes him in a state where it's only very rare enough that it can trick himself into believing that the toxin is gone. But on top of that, they also imply things like Judy was talking about, like his present insomnia and his continually lacking mental state as the episode goes on. You even see like the 5 o'clock shadow he grows throughout the episode, and how Alfred tries to offer him the food, or how he thinks that Joker's sneaking up on him in the cave. Like all of those things still connecting here, still when he's in denial that he's been affected by the gases. when you later find out that the entire break-in was a ruse just to expose him to the gas. That being said, when you finally do get to the asylum, they touch on a lot of interesting aspects, like how they refuse to remove the mask because it might affect his mental state, or when they rattle off the aliases of the members of Arkham Asylum, and they specifically use the name Jack Napier, which would imply that this film considered itself in canon to Tim Burton's 1989 Batman, only featured about 5 years before this series hit the air. On top of that, you see the effect of the dream sequences continually getting worse and worse until you eventually get to the sequence of Batman in the sewers underneath the asylum after he makes his first escape. And it's also worth mentioning that as Batman goes into his psychosis, he even picks the wrong villain when he tries to tell the department that he's not insane, because he assumes that the Joker did it, even though the MO makes no sense. Which does allude to the fact that he doesn't, even though what he's saying is the truth, he doesn't have as much control as he thinks he does. Which leads...
What's kind of funny is when you mention the Joker, it's like that's the first villain he always hallucinates. When he starts hallucinating the other villains,
it's the one that's closest in his subconscious. It's the one that never quite leaves him alone, which is a theory which is a function throughout the entire series. Now, one thing that you guys probably wouldn't notice, unless you only would notice this if you have actually watched all 27 episodes before this. When they get to the dream sequence, the one where he drops the flashlight and the rat turns into the Joker and goes into the spotlight, and all the villains keep melding out of each other. The music that plays behind that is distorted, remixed versions of all of the villain themes throughout each of the individual characters. Where Harvey's theme is originally played on like a flute and a clarinet, but now it's played as like a dirty jazz trumpet. Or Penguin's is now being played on tubas instead of on a xylophone, so on and so forth. All of them are molded versions of their themes in the same way that these are all caricatured, mixed, bent versions of all of the different villains that Batman's fighting. Or how they particularly use shots in the episode of showing both what Batman is physically seeing, or scenes like when Two-Face's coin turns into the saw blade, and when he throws it, you don't see Batman's perspective, but you see Batman ducking nothing. Constant reminders to the audience that what you're seeing is actually still all inside of Batman's head. And the importance you get in seeing like directors like Frank Miller or other people in modern day who are just literally not willing to show Batman in any sort of vulnerable state because they think it ruins the character. And yet this show shows Batman literally curled up on the floor like crying, falling into madness. Like literally almost on like a Alice in Wonderland kind of effect as he falls into Scarecrow's mouth as the scene goes forward. And the dream sequence itself, like I said, was the first one where they ever showed Batman's parents dying, at least the entirety of the scene. And I still get chills every single time I see the gun barrel, the tunnel turn and become the gun barrel and shoot Bruce with it. And it just shows that, how the toxin never quite leaves him or how he's unable to escape from everything. And that leads you towards realizing that if everything is that he's seeing, if everything is Batman's being shown, it's supposed to be a representation of Batman's biggest fear, then it leaves you with the question, what does Batman fear more than anything? And it would be the easy answer to assume that Batman fears the actual villains he's seeing more than anything, but the common theme throughout all of it is Batman fears his own failure. That Batman fears that everything he's been doing is for nothing. And that's on top of that, viewing how like he's constantly unable to save his parents, like how the vertigo shot pulls away for when he's trying to run towards his parents towards the alley, or the way that each of the villains molds from one to the other and all that kind of stuff, all just towering over top of him, or how the Joker in particular is the one that continually keeps coming back. Or how he shows Alfred and Robin, who've gotten kind of dragged into his own insanity, if he's all wrong in all of this, and how they're the ones encouraging him to fall down the rabbit hole and everything's fine, and trying to, almost like they're vengefully trying to get them to fall down to the same insanity that Batman wonders that if he's pulled them into, in everything. But, there's a thing that ties into this episode called the Arkham villain theory. It's a major theme in the book. I didn't come up with this theory, but I've used it as a major telling tool throughout the book, where the idea is that every single one of Batman's villains is supposed to be a representation of Batman's psyche. And Scarecrow is obviously a representation of his fear, or in particular his fear of failure. Joker is a representation of Batman's arrogance. No, that's wrong. Is a representation of his what was it? Of his restraint. Penguin is a representation of his gluttony. Catwoman is a representation of his lust. Riddler is a representation of his arrogance. I'm trying to make sure I don't forget anybody. Ra's is a representation. Ra's is a hard one. I haven't gotten to him yet. But if I remember right, Ra's is I found that Ra's is a representation of his potential for corruption. I'm trying to think, is there any other villain? I have Two-Face is an expression of his duality. Freeze is his emotional coldness. And they kind of go on from there. But Scarecrow is obviously, of course he's a representation of his fear. But the levels they go deeper than that is what makes it interesting. The fact that this is the end of actually like an honest trilogy of Scarecrow episodes is what makes it the most fascinating. There are only 2 main villains that get more than 1 episode dedicated to themselves in the first season. Joker gets 4, Scarecrow gets 3, but Scarecrow gets the final episode. Scarecrow gets to leave the show at the end of the season, and I think the final impression you get from this episode is probably the best they could have left it. And although I won't say it's the darkest episode of the show, it's definitely one of the. And it's definitely the one that I wanted to show to you guys for our curation segment. So,
excellent.
So, before we head out, does anyone have any final thoughts about any of the movies or the episode or anything that we've covered? This is your time to pitch any upcoming projects you might have or anything like that. And then if everything's set to go, we'll just shut down our recording here. We'll have a little bit of a post wrap up and we'll be on our way.
Well, we hit this topic really briefly, but yeah, like the part where Batman's wondering where is all of this for nothing, and then you constantly hear the Doctor at Arkham saying, we need to break him out of his delusion and whatnot, and it's like, you hear, so I don't remember who brought it up, like in the episode that is, that, there are some that believe in Batman and some that don't. They think he's just a crazy guy in a suit. Obviously the Doctor may be one of them. Or who knows, maybe the Doctor's right, and that's like the question it like strikes into the viewer there.
It's a good number of episodes in before like the average main characters of the show acknowledge the fact that Batman is actually a factual person. They keep that pretty obscure for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually not until the first Scarecrow episode that Gordon acknowledges that he exists.
Yeah, up until then, he's just like some urban legend in the town. It's like, who's this vigilante? I feel like I need to rewatch this whole series now.
Well, if only we had a potential web series that we came up with off the top of our heads about 20 minutes ago that we may or may not be discussing the details of when this recording ends. Because I think this might be a lot of fun. Anybody else closing thoughts, stuff you're working on in the future, anything you want to plug?
I'm currently working on my own YouTube channel. My YouTube name is Hotaru Daru. It kind of encompasses a various number of geeky and nerdy topics. It's kind of a mod podge of things, so I don't really have any particular thing I stick to, but you can check me out if you want.
So, upcoming things I'm going to plug. Obviously, as I said, Man Who Watched Batman has been long in development, but I think we are about to actually release main copies within the next month or so. On top of that, I've got an important announcement. There's people around who have known this for a little while yet, but this is my first time actually going public with this. I am actually working on my first comic book right now. I'm a professional artist. If you ever get a chance to look him up, his name is Tyler Sowles from Killustration. Me and him are in early negotiations. Nothing promised yet, but we're in early negotiations for a horror comedy comic called Corpse Corp. I've been writing for the last couple of months now. And I'm really excited to see where that goes, and I'll definitely be posting more details as me and him figure it out. He just read the first draft of the first script earlier this week, and he loved it. And so I think it actually, like... I'm really critical of my own work. So like I'm not gonna say like my first script, like the first episode of my book sucks, but like I feel like it really doesn't start getting good until episode 2. Same thing with like whenever anyone reads my book, they're like, yeah, I just finished reading the first chapter on Leather Wings, and I thought it was awesome. And I just sit there, I'm like, I have to stop myself. I'm like, okay, I thought that episode was crap, but okay.
Like, say, like I feel the same.
Like my book literally gets better as it goes on because I don't. I only edit for grammar. I don't edit for content. So like I do physically feel like I get better at writing it as I go on. So like there is a piece of me that feels weird writing. Like you'll actually notice like the writing style in early episodes is way different than it is in later episodes.
Yeah, I feel the same way every time I sew a new cosplay. I think it looks absolutely horrible, and then I get a lot of positive feedback that weekend. I'm like, okay, I know I'm just being harsh on myself now. Thank you, everybody.
I'm the same way with a lot of my photos too. It can get really critical sometimes, but you'd be amazed at when you finally get so tired, but the time you finally get to, oh, nice.
Very nice. Is that one of your pieces, Ken?
That's mine, yep.
In one of my cosplays, yeah.
Yeah, so Zach, like I said, both of these guys are people I've met from different conventions. I met her at at Youmacon last year, and she was at the this giant Final Fantasy shoot we had. She actually had a working Phoenix Down cosplay.
It was a lot of fun. I honestly had a lot of fun putting that together. It was honestly an extremely easy costume because it was made out of literally pieces of clothing that I had around the house and then the wings that I had.
Right.
But it was a lot of fun.
And then our friend Albert down there, he's done a Deadpool cosplay. He does which Naruto character were you again?
Asuma.
Yeah, and then he also did he does General Shang cosplay on occasions as well. So, any last final words before we cut this out?
I had a lot of fun.
I'm glad. I'm really glad. That's what we aim for.
I hope you actually post this time.
Oh, jeez, don't even get me started on what happened. We don't talk about Saturday Morning Fever. For those guys, okay, long story short, there's another show. I am still not giving up on it, but it's a riff track style MST3K show for Saturday morning cartoon shows called Saturday Morning Fever. We did an episode doing like old Marvel and DC like shows from like the 60s and 70s, and we got copyright blocked to hell. Okay. So like there's no worse feeling than having a product and literally not being able to do anything with it. So I still have the file. I'm going to send out copies to whoever wants to see it, at any particular time, but I can't post it public, and that really sucks. It's the same way with like the Waylon music video I did like a million years ago, but I'm not going to get into that too much because that's a weird situation. But anyway, we will... you guys can follow us at the socials. Feel free to like and subscribe below. If you have any ideas on what you'd like to see on a future episode of Deadmen Tell All Tales, please leave your answer in the comments and tell us what your favorite dark children's movie was. And hopefully we will see you next time. So from all of us here at DeadmenInc.com, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.